Hello, we are so glad you are here and are interested in learning more about the MPA Guide. My name is Katie Barron-Alvin, and I am honored to be here to introduce some of our wonderful MPA Guide collaborators. The purpose of this video is to give you an overview of the MPA Guide, how it came to be, the clarity it can provide on marine protected areas, and some of the ways in which users have found it helpful. We will be hearing from these speakers about the MPA Guide. They represent an even larger international network of experts and knowledge holders who have been co-creating and using this tool to help bring clarity and transparency to the conversation about MPAs.
The MPA Guide was years in the making. It really started with a conversation about global reporting on marine protected areas, because we saw the opportunity to use evidence from scientific research and other forms of knowledge to help reduce confusion about what makes an MPA effective. We saw the need to keep a particular focus on how MPAs can benefit nature and people. And we recognized that reaching global goals for ocean protection, it really requires a shared understanding and a common language about MPAs and about what makes them effective. So the founding partners of the MPA Guide are the United Nations Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center, IUCN's World Commission on Protected Areas, Marine, National Geographic Pristine Seas, the Marine Conservation Institute's MP Atlas, and the MPA Project at Oregon State University. These founding partners joined together with experts from around the world to develop a shared language that defines MPA protections and defines their effectiveness. What we're finding is that much of the confusion about MPAs, it can be resolved, and simply by understanding what types of MPAs have the greatest outcomes for biodiversity and the greatest outcomes for the people that depend on it. So specifically, clarity can come from understanding, first of all, what activities are compatible with different levels of protection. Second, at what stage an MPA counts as effectively protected. And third, understanding what specific conditions are needed for an MPA to be successful for both nature and people. So after many meetings, discussions, analysis, this global network of collaborators created the MPA Guide. The results were published in the research journal Science in 2021, and collaborations are continuing to assess effective MPAs around the world.
That's right. The MPA Guide is based in science and evidence and relevant to policy and decision-making by linking different types of MPAs with their expected outcomes for nature and people based on what's happening in an MPA or MPA zone. People have been using the framework and guidance in the MPA Guide around the world to help design, plan, track, and evaluate MPAs and inform decisions about societal, scientific, cultural, and policy priorities. Now I'll go over the structure of the guide. It organizes MPAs according to their stage of establishment, which describes whether the MPA is actually operational in the real world, and level of protection, which looks at what types of activities are happening and what their impacts are to the ocean. Stage and level can apply to whole MPAs or to individual MPA zones if different places in the MPA have different regulations and uses. The guide describes the enabling conditions that should be in place for effective MPAs and links stage of establishment, level of protection, and enabling conditions to the outcomes that can be expected from the site. An MPA that exists in law but is not actually enforced in the water, or that includes high-impact activities such as industrial-scale fishing or aquaculture, won't have the same outcomes as one that is well-managed and enforced with only minimal impact uses. The guide does not rank MPAs or pass judgment about the MPA stage and level. It simply describes what can be expected from different types of MPAs.
To help answer the question on when should an MPA count, the MPA Guide has 4 stages of establishment. These stages are proposed or committed, designated, implemented, and actively managed. At the proposed or committed stage, the site has been formally declared as an area that has been selected for conservation as its primary goal. At the designated stage, the MPA is legally established with defined boundaries for long-term conservation, explicit goals, and primary focus on biodiversity conservation. At the implemented stage, the MPA has an active management plan. It is at this stage when biodiversity benefits can begin to accrue. At the actively managed stage, ongoing management, scientific monitoring, and adaptability are key. When an MPA is actively managed, the area is subject to periodic review and adjustments are made as needed to achieve the goals. At this stage, active monitoring, community engagement, and evaluation are integral.
And what does protection mean? The MPA guide has 4 levels of protection: minimally protected, lightly protected, highly protected, and fully protected. So going back, the fully protected implies 0 extractive or destructive impacts, while allowing for non-extractive activities like snorkeling, swimming, cultural events, education, and more. So no extractive activities. Highly protected allows only for light extractive activities, so very light impacts, such as low-impact fishing and small-scale anchoring, with strict regulations on non-extractive activities for minimal impact. Lightly protected allows for some biodiversity protection, but permits moderate impact activities, including occasional dredging when it's needed, anchoring, and fishing at a medium scale, with restrictions on non-extractive uses for moderate impact. And minimally protected means that extensive extraction and other activities with high impact occur, but the site can still be considered an MPA because it meets the IUCN criteria and provides some conservation benefits. So all the other very high impact activities that are not considered in here will be incompatible with conservation of nature.
The MPA guide outlines enabling conditions to help address the question of what is needed to achieve effective ocean protection. Enabling conditions are a bit like building blocks of a successful MPA. They're the processes involved in planning, governing, and managing an MPA, which are critical to ensuring the MPA meets its biodiversity conservation goals and contributes to human well-being. Research shows that when these conditions are not in place, the ecological outcomes associated with protection level and stage of establishment are unlikely. There are different enabling conditions that are important at different stages of establishment. The MPA guide also outlines several enabling conditions that are important across all of the stages of establishment, including those that are listed here.
All of these elements work together to determine the conservation outcomes from MPAs. We've seen, based on a very large body of science collected over many years, that the conservation outcomes are determined by the level of protection and the stage of implementation working together. So as you increase the levels of protection given, so we see an increasing number and diversity of benefits from that protection to the environment and to human well-being. So, for example, the biggest conservation gains in terms of biodiversity recovery, or fisheries support, or environmental resilience are to be had from MPAs that are protected to a high or fully protected state. And also those MPAs which are implemented or actively managed are the ones that are delivering the most conservation in the water. So taken together, what we can see is that the heavy lifting in terms of conservation is in the top right-hand corner of this matrix, where there is an advanced stage of implementation, active management of MPAs, but there's also a high level of protection given. That's not to say that the other MPAs are not delivering some conservation benefits, but they're not nearly as great as you get from these ones in the top right-hand corner of the matrix.
MPA guide assessments are intended to be relatively quick, especially for people who are familiar with the site. An MPA guide assessment can be useful at any time and during any stage, including the planning stages of an MPA. Ideally, these assessments will be updated annually for each MPA zone or when there has been a change, for example, to the use of the area, the overlying regulations from entities outside of the MPA, or the MPA zone management plan. In general, the steps you can use to follow the MPA guide are to identify the location and boundaries of your MPA or MPA zone, determine the stage of establishment for the MPA, determine the level of protection for the MPA or each zone, review the enabling conditions, and consider likely outcomes. The identified stage and level of the area can give a better sense of the expected outcomes from an implemented or actively managed MPA with key enabling conditions in place based on the level of protection. The MPA Atlas team has created a tool that walks you through the process of applying the MPA Guide framework and contributing to our database. You can contact us at info@mpatlas.org for an introduction to the tool.
The MPA Guide provides a decision tree that you can follow to quickly help you determine the level of protection of an MPA. With the decision tree, you look at each of these 7 activities and their impacts and follow the tree to determine the level of protection of an MPA. For example, here's the decision tree for the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. Papahanaumokuakea is a large area of the Hawaiian Islands. Papahanaumokuakea covers 17% of the United States' total marine area and 47% of the U.S. marine protected areas. The MPA Guide shows that the Papahanaumokuakea is highly protected. Some low-impact cultural fishing is allowed in the area, but the impact is likely so small that biodiversity is highly conserved.
The MPA Guide helps to clarify some confusing language about MPAs and what makes them effective. There are many different tools for assessing different aspects of effectiveness, and these rely on site-level monitoring data. The MPA Guide is unique because it helps us to understand the expected outcomes of an MPA based on its stage of establishment and level of protection. It's quite easy to use and accessible, and because of this, it can serve as an entry point to then using other assessment tools to assess actual outcomes. So the MPA Guide can be used as a complementary tool alongside other effectiveness assessment methods to help us understand the intended, expected, and actual outcomes of an MPA, and also to help us understand the different benefits that different types of MPAs can have for people and nature.
The MPA Guide is designed to be accessible and available to anyone who wants to clarify expectation of an MPA. This can be useful for planning protection for a new MPA, as well as for reviewing protection already in place in an existing MPA. The MPA Guide can help find out what benefits can be expected from an MPA. It's already been used by local managers, scientists, government officials, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who found it useful for understanding the expected benefits of the MPA or the MPA system.
The MPA Guide User Manual, Publication in Science, Expanded Guidance, and other resources are all available in multiple languages on the MPA Guide website. You can also connect with other MPA Guide users in the Facebook group. We are also happy to connect with you anytime. Thank you for joining us in the use of the MPA Guide to help support effective ocean conservation.